I proclaim with all the power that is in me that the Inside Out podcast is the only true and living podcast on the face of the whole earth, with which I, Bruce Reginald McConkie, am well pleased, speaking under the podcast collectively as well as individually.
Good evening and welcome to Inside Out Live, all the way from Canada and all the way from Utah. And of course, we've got our very own, my partner in crime and partner in many interesting things, Mr. Jim Bennett. How are you, Jim?
I am well. How are you, sir?
I'm doing well. We've been doing some technical things and trying to invest in some of the technologies to improve the quality of the podcast. So folks, as you're listening, we want to bring you better quality videos going forward. But we have a very interesting topic to start us off with, and Jim is going to lead us in that. Go ahead, Jim.
Well, I posted a thing. I'm grateful there are 3 people here watching, and I didn't post that we were doing this until about 15 minutes ago. So I'm grateful that you guys recognize that we're trying to do this as a fixture on Tuesday nights. Glad to have you here. And while I've spent way too much time online, Ian, I don't know if you know that.
You've been doing some interesting, putting some songs that you've written. Some animated videos, which look fun and amazing.
Well, I mean, that's a labor of love. I've written all of these ridiculous songs over the years, and AI now gives me an ability to create essentially professional-looking videos and recordings of these songs. And so that takes way too much time, but that's another story altogether. So I was on X today. I should call it Twitter, but Elon is wearing me down, and now I'm starting to call it X. And I bumped into this guy here. Oh, no. That's me that's videos. Dang it. Back to where I was. So here it is. This guy, Brad Edison Bonham, says, "What I'm about to say is totally against the church handbook, but you should absolutely conceal carry to church. Yes, I know they prohibit it, but it's probably the softest target on earth. I know of at least 5 other people in my ward that carry. I'm assuming there are others as well. Be prepared to protect the flock, even though you'll likely never need to." And if you see this, that 47,000 people have seen that. And I responded, only 1.4 thousand have seen my response, but I said, it's always stunning to me when people think there's nothing wrong with apostasy if it comes from the right wing. If you look at all the comments on this guy's stuff, I'm very much in the minority. These are all people, yes, I do. As a little old lady in a wheelchair, I self-protect. The LDS Church says no guns. Many of us disregard that. Let's see. I assume people already were. It's irresponsible not to, and on and on and on and on and on. And the thing that I want to focus on is that, I mean, this is something that I got into with Jacob Hansen when we talked about Aaron Sherinian. But the issue is so many members of the church freak out whenever somebody tries to be LGBTQ inclusive or tries to do anything that's perceived as left-wing. But if the handbook, which explicitly says you cannot conceal carry at church, the handbook says this, and yet you have somebody publicly saying, go ahead and defy that. And this is somebody who considers themselves a very active, righteous member of the church. Why is it that it's acceptable for right-wing apostasy? Because that's the definition of apostasy. If you go to the church handbook, it says that apostasy is clear and public opposition to doctrines, leaders, or policies of the church. So by that definition, this very much qualifies as apostasy. But not only do the right-wing members not see it that way, the church, to some degree, have you ever heard of anybody getting church discipline because they concealed carry to church?
No, I haven't. No.
So I'm opening this up to you, Ian, and I'm opening up to anybody who wants to comment. But what do you think? Why is that?
Yeah, well, this just in terms of backstory and context, there's been a number of tragic events and incidents where members of the church have been attacked and murdered, sadly, and there's been what 2 or 3 incidents that have occurred, over the recent weeks and months. And when I have seen this online from friends of mine, most of whom are still very active in the church, they are aware of the situation, and some of them have also commented about taking measures to defend themselves. Clearly, they feel threatened and at risk, and that the church, maybe not the church, or certain individuals in the church are being targeted. We don't know right now, Jim, if it's the church being targeted. I don't know enough about what's going on there in the background. But clearly there's a sense of foreboding, or a sense of risk and threat that some members perceive, enough to what they feel is warrant to take a weapon to church. The idea of, coming from the UK, which is hardly any weapons in the system at all, probably that's changed now over the last few years. It's, UK has not been, traditionally has not been a gun culture for, well over a century. The United States is very much a gun culture. There's this fundamental right, and you can quote the Constitution, the right to bear arms, right? The right to have a weapon for Americans. In some ways, it's quite uniquely American, where the people feel they have a right to carry a weapon in the event the government might threaten them. I think that's the constitutional position. The church, and I've got an article here, the church supports the Constitution, by the way, right? Yet in the handbook, as you've rightly said, it's not allowed to bring a weapon to church. The idea of someone bringing weapons to church and guns to church would kind of make me feel uncomfortable. But to the point you're making, if they're bringing the weapon to church, they're actually in contravention of the policy of the church. And my response would be that some apostasy is different to other apostasy. Some apostasy is acceptable compared to other things where people apostatize, where it's not acceptable. And I'll try and define that. I think where you've got a situation like this, similar to COVID, where President Nelson came out specifically and said that to church members that they need to take the vaccine and wear masks. He came out officially to communicate a position on COVID. As you know, there was a pretty strong negative response to that message, where a lot of people in the church ignored the advice from a living prophet. Did the church excommunicate people for contravening that? It wasn't a policy, but that direction? No. Will they excommunicate people for bringing a weapon to church? The whole thing is just completely frightening to me. It's shocking, but I don't think they will. But if you attack the church leaders and you come out on some completely opposing fundamental doctrine, if it's doctrinal or a policy that could impact a bigger number in the church, then that would be deemed as a type of apostasy that is unacceptable. Where you have an apostasy where most of the members, or many of the members, perhaps, I don't know the numbers, agree with the idea of bringing a weapon to church. So if there's a majority in the church that are okay with bringing a weapon to church, it's highly unlikely the church are going to take issue with those people, because, as I say, I think that's the kind of apostasy, kind of breach that the church will look the other way. But if it's a different kind of apostasy, like, LGBTQ or other things where the vast majority of the membership don't agree or accept, then those apostasies are not allowed. That would be that's my take on it.
Well, it's so bizarre to me, though, that, we had Karen Hyatt on here, who's been excommunicated, and she has not spoken publicly out against the church in criticism of the church. What she said is that she believes that Joseph Smith is not a polygamist. Now, I think she's wrong, and the church thinks she's wrong, but her belief and stated belief was enough to get her excommunicated, even though she was not attacking the church. Whereas this guy, this Brad Edison Bonham dude, is openly saying, yes, I know the handbook says this, don't do it. And publicly telling people to defy the church. And I am sure that he's just going to skate on that. But it's just stunning to me. It's always stunning to me that people seem to think, and maybe not without justification, because there isn't a consequence when they do this, but they seem to think it's okay to be apostate. It's okay to attack the church as long as you're doing it from the right wing. So it's also okay to beat up on Aaron Sherinian because Aaron Sherinian is left wing or is perceived as left wing. And so it's okay to beat up on Aaron Sherinian even though the prophets hired him. And it's okay to complain about woke BYU professors and demand that the church fire them and to rally people in activism against the church, as long as that activism is right-wing activism. If it's left-wing activism, that's when we get into trouble. And I really think that just needs to be highlighted. So we need seeing it, acknowledging it as a reality, I think is the first step towards changing it. And I think it's something that we just have turned a blind eye to as a church for way too long. So that's my opening rant.
Yeah, no, that's interesting. If the church membership, US, was predominantly Democratic, liberal, left-wing, a bit more socialist, right? The church serves the majority, right? So you've got this traditional, orthodox, right-wing, Republican, grassroots, historical majority in the church. There's no question about that. And the church has seen what happens when it pushes too hard against that. You've said before, and I've agreed with you, I think I've said it as well, the church is afraid of this very significant, powerful group within the church, Republican. Trump, right? You've got a lot of members in the church who love Trump. Trump can do anything. The church members are quite happy to go get a temple recommend, answer the questions, and support anything and everything that Trump does. Okay, and I think that is a significant element in the church for sure. The church won't take them on because it's the majority of the church. I think most of the members are probably quite Republican, quite right wing, and there's less Democrats. If it was flipped the other way, I think the church would take a different position. So the idea of the church is very much influenced by politics, and certainly influenced by these very strong voices that reside at really the rank and file. The church is not set to upset them. So this is, like I said, this is the kind of apostasy the church is quite happy to allow. It won't have any disciplinary meetings for those guys. But the Karen Hyatt, who would go against a fundamental position of the church that Joseph Smith. The church says that Joseph Smith practiced polygamy. Most members, I think, accept that now. If you go against that, then you're going against the flow. You're going against the tide. The church can't have that. That is unacceptable. A type of apostasy the church will not accept.
Well, I think you're absolutely right. I put up that comment that says, "Do what is right as long as it's fiscally convenient."
Right. Yeah. You don't want to upset. It's politics, right? You don't want to upset your base. Yep. So the question is, what is the base of the Mormon membership in America? Where the church is strong, right? In those areas, right? Arizona, Utah, California, elsewhere, etc. Some of the Midwest states. Well, the church has a political base. I do know, and I don't think we've discussed this, but the church does have a political. We talked about the recommendation we've made through conversation with Greg Prince, which continue, by the way. Our listeners will be pleased to know that we will be continuing our conversations about the roadmap for improving Mormonism and other topics that were identified. But we talked about the example of the Catholic Church having what was it called? What's the Catholic Church as political organization? The Holy See? The Holy See, correct. That's right. We've talked about that. And we've said the church needs to have an official organization, if you like, of that. It would do well if it had that. Unofficially, it has that. We do know that, right? There is a group of people, this shouldn't surprise anyone, who are mapping and tracking and monitoring all the political stuff and advising the church leaders. I know this from speaking to senior leaders that this group exists. It's not official. The church wouldn't officialize it, formalize it rather. But we've got people who are very savvy, very intelligent, advising the church on what's going on politically in the US and certainly around the world, and giving advice to the leaders. And why wouldn't they? The church leaders seek that advice on what position to, have, what to stay quiet on, what battles to fight, when to stand up. Like remind me, the California, where they shipped all the people down, the members down on the bus down to California,
Proposition 8.
Proposition 8, that's right, where the church did become involved actively and took a position, and it lost that. So I think I know for a fact that the church does receive professional advice on politics and how to respond, how to react, and sometimes staying quiet, knowing what battles to fight, knowing what battles not to fight. I think that is, that's how the church operates. It's very much in many ways a political organization as well as a religious one, for sure, and a financial one and economic one. Yeah.
Well, a whole bunch of comments here, just quickly. Good day, Ian and Jim. It must be Wednesday already. Haha, it's Tuesday. We've been consistent on Tuesdays, Peter. But I think that was a joke. Maybe it wasn't. I don't know.
I think it was a joke. Yeah, we're trying to do Tuesdays. That's right. Hello, Peter.
Good day, blokes, especially Peter Higgs. Saddling the recumbent as we speak. Anyone else getting swole with inside out? Ooh, should we do that, Ian? Should we be exercising while we do this?
We can. You mean I get my boxing gloves out and I've got this punch bag. I could do that. It'd be interesting because when we get a topic that I really feel strongly about, I could hit the punch bag pretty hard. So I could do that for sure.
That'd be good.
Yeah, get some anger out, get some frustration out. Yeah.
Good evening, everyone, from Ben White. Bruce says, Guy McDude, Peter Higgs, and Ben White, howdy.
Okay, cool.
SLC Vinyl, I'm late, but I'm here. SLC Vinyl, welcome from Bruce.
Hey, Bruce.
Ben says, I have to say that Jim is an absolute saint for all the way he bonks the Desnat moles in the head in a never-ending game of whack-a-mole on Twitter.
That's good for you, Jim.
Yes, I don't do that nearly as often as I used to, but every once in a while I go down that rabbit hole. I'm late too, listening at 2 times to get time caught up. Thanks, Guy McDude. It bothers how many members refuse to leave their weapons at home for church. I agree, SLC Vinyl. As it relates to concealed carry, I'm not a gun person, but I can't say I blame anyone for carrying in today. Are you a gun person, Ian? Do you have a gun?
No, that's an interesting question. I grew up with a pellet gun, a BB gun, basically, and so that's what we had. But I'm in Canada now, and when I first got here, in fact, when I went to America for the first time on holiday, way back, and we were in a diner, I think, and these police officers came in, and I saw their weapons, donning these pistols. It kind of shocked me for a bit. Now, you see it all the time. So we're not really a gun family. I know friends of mine, in and out the church are. There's a police training gun center, literally 2 blocks from where we live, just down the road here, and you can go and take lessons. I've took lessons shooting a gun when I was in the Sea Cadets, a 2.2, but no, we're not a gun family, and we didn't grow up in a gun culture. It was more of it was knives. We kind of weren't involved in that, but the communities, if you can call them that, the places that we grew up in, the working class areas that we grew up in, it was mostly scrapping with your fists and the rare occasion of the knife when it got really serious, but it was quite rare. But UK's changed a lot now. I think UK is getting close to this gun culture, and I can see both sides on the gun thing, right? I can see the need to protect yourself and to defend yourself. I can see that, someone's in your home and you have to protect yourself. Then someone's got a gun. I mean, how do you do that, right? If that happens. On the other hand, if everyone has a gun, then there's always that risk of people, acting recklessly and using that gun for all kinds of stuff. It's an interesting topic, and it's enshrined in the Constitution. And while we're talking about the Constitution, Jim, I just want to take your apostasy point, well, before we do, is there any questions or feedback or comments on the apostasy, on the idea of members taking weapons, taking guns to church? What does people think about that? Do you agree with that? What are people saying about it?
Well, Clobber Digger says hi from Tasmania, Australia. Ultra-Orthodox upbringing to less active mixed faith marriage. This is Ben's thing. Do what is right as long as it's fiscally convenient. But this was interesting. Howie Rourke says Brad Bonham, he's the guy that I've been scrapping with on Twitter, is a successful entrepreneur, investor, philanthropist, and community leader in Utah with ties to the Republican Party. Nothing going to happen to him. I mean, you're right. Nothing is going to happen to him, but there's really no question that what he's doing there is apostasy by the church's definition. And the fact that the church carves out exceptions for apostasy, or the members also carve out exceptions for apostasy, means the inconsistency makes it very difficult to be able to navigate how we're supposed to interact with this and recognize that politics, the church tries to say it's not political, but if politics really does weigh into whether or not something's apostasy, isn't that a problem? I think it is a problem. We got Ben says 13 watching, only 3 likes. I'm going to ask you all to smash that like button. Thanks, Ben. Hey, Guy McDude. Peter is down under it's Wednesday. Oh, there you go. That's why he said it was Wednesday. Okay, here's
they're in the future.
SLC says, I am a gun person, far enough left that you get your guns back. But I don't think there's anything wrong with reasonable gun regulation and don't think we should be carrying at church. And Guy McDude says, locus of control, is it okay to disobey authority when internal locus dictates disobeying authority for your protection? And this catches us up. And Colby says, hi, Colby Reddish. What makes this the apostasy edition? Ian, you want to recap this whole thing for Colby in 30 seconds or less?
Sure. The idea of the church handbook says very clearly that you're not allowed to take weapons to church. I agree with that, right? And you're just not allowed to do it. It's an important red line you don't cross. Yet there's somebody online, Brad, don't know this individual, who's advocating the right for members to take weapons, take guns to church to defend themselves. That's my understanding of what he's trying to say. And this Brad individual is actually quite boldly telling people to ignore that policy in the church handbook. Jim, you're saying that because of that contravention of that policy, Brad and others are technically acting in opposition to the church in the form of apostasy.
Correct.
Because they're in breach of the policy. And we then had a conversation back and forward about, well, some apostasy is acceptable, some apostasies are not acceptable. Clearly, this is going to be acceptable. You have that Brad who posted that post generated what, 14,000 responses?
47,000 responses.
47,000 responses. Many of which agreed, I think, with the idea of taking a weapon or gun. I don't feel comfortable at all with that idea. It's a difficult one because, like I said, if you're in, if you went to that congregation that was attacked, right, the Michigan in Michigan, and you're in that congregation, you'd feel pretty uncomfortable and unhinged, I think, and quite nervous about, is there going to be another incident? And you'd want to make sure that your family are safe. Because if you look at the culture of the church and the openness of the meetings, the church is actively inviting people to come into church. You could literally walk up the street, go into the building, go to the meeting, and they will absolutely be delighted about that, because they'll introduce you to the missionaries, add you to the teaching pool, and at some point baptize you. That's what the church wants. The church is a very open culture, right? It wants you to come in, and you could walk in there and you could have a gun on you. And I don't think there's any, I've never seen a church, one of our churches at least, where you have to walk through a metal detector. Are those days coming where you'll have to, like in a school, where you have to walk through a metal detector? That would be a very, very tragic milestone if you have to, go through a metal detector to determine you have a knife when you're a weapon. I hope we don't get there, but it's a difficult one, because if you feel threatened or not safe, would I go to church if I felt? I wouldn't go. I just wouldn't go. I just don't want to go where there's people wearing, holding guns and the whole thing just seems odd to me. But I can understand why people would want to take a gun to church.
All right. Well, that was Colby Reddish. He
That
says,
helps.
Ben White says, are we just allowing any and all randos into the chat tonight? That's an inside baseball thing, Ian, that may be going over your head there. Colby challenged Jacob Hansen to a debate about the historicity of the Book of Mormon. And Jacob says, I don't just debate randos. But Colby, you actually had a conversation with Jacob Hansen, I understand. I haven't seen it. I'm not sure if it's online, but I'll look at that. Only if the random know the secret name, sign, and related token. It's an exclusive chat, really. Yes.
Okay.
Well, so you're talking about the Constitution, Ian. You want to expand on that a little bit?
So there's a relationship between the U.S. Constitution. In the UK, by the way, you're just not allowed to have carry weapons. You're just not, unless you're a police officer, law enforcement, etc., etc. There are very strict rules and regulations about taking a weapon to a gun club and stuff like that. In America, it's a whole different ball game. You know, the culture, the history, you know, the tradition, etc. And it's just a completely different, situation. And just let me look at my, just bear with me a second here. So the church views the U.S. Constitution as a divinely inspired, I would describe it as a charter, a document, but I'd describe it as a charter, established by God through wise men to protect freedom and rights of all people, Americans, and encourage members to uphold its principles as engaged, informed citizens. Church scripture, Doctrine and Covenants, explicitly states God established the Constitution for liberty, and leaders teach that its core principles, like agency, limited government, and I feel strongly about government not having too much power, too much overreach, as I'm seeing in Canada and certainly the UK, but being there, government being there when you need them for the basics. Okay, I'm somewhere in the middle. Not too much government involvement, too much control or regulation, because we have to have liberty and freedom and to be able to do our own thing and lead our own lives, etc. Not too much regulation, but also when we need help from the government's there in a kind of a measured, balanced kind of way. I'm kind of somewhere in the middle. And so, to, again, establish the Constitution of liberty and leaders that teach its core principles, like agency, limited government, and the rule of law. These are crucial for establishing God's kingdom on earth and preparing for Christ's return. Members have a unique duty to defend these inspired principles, often through supporting good leaders and maintaining civic harmony, even while recognizing the document isn't perfect. And then, if you remember on our missions, Jim, when you and I were on a missions, I think before you came out, I think it was July 87 in the Ensign, there was a section right in the middle of the Ensign which talked about something I read in Dumfries when I was, actually it was probably came out, if I was in Dumfries, it came out probably in February, March 87. And I read in the Ensign that Wilford Woodruff, a leader of the church, recounted that the founding fathers, including George Washington and signers of the Declaration of Independence, appeared to Wilford Woodruff in the St. George Temple in Utah. Wilford Woodruff requested that it was requested that he would perform the temple ordinances on behalf of George Washington, on behalf of them in the spirit world, initiating a new practice for the church and affirming their divine inspiration in establishing the U.S. government constitution. And there's an article that goes into that. This was a visitation by Washington and some other founding fathers in August 1877, and this was in the Ensign. And in the Ensign, I've not got that particular article, but people could probably dig it out. And there's a talk in April, a general conference talk. It's in April, I think, 1989 that discussed it. I think the date was correct. So the founding fathers visited Wilford Woodruff. The work was done, Jim, for these individuals in the temple. And technically, presumably, because they visited and they requested this of Wilford Woodruff, the founding fathers are now Mormon. I don't know if we talk about that at the general conference, but technically, the founding fathers are Mormons now. presumably they've accepted the work and accepted the ordinances, etc., that they asked for a Wilford Woodruff. So my question here, with all the stuff that's going on, the gun laws, which is a very emotive topic, right? The stuff that's happening in the world today, you've got Trump going to Davos tomorrow in Europe, and there's a whole raging argument, I think it is now, about America taking over Greenland, and all the stuff happening there, which has got the Europeans riled up. I think there's going to be a showdown tomorrow. My question is, in light of the church's position with the Constitution, in light of the fact that the founding fathers are now members of the church that accepted the ordinances, and the church's commitment to this inspired charter, the founding rights, guns, and what's going on in the world geopolitically, what's the church's position on these geopolitical issues? Not just local and national gun laws, which is very, very important, but what's the church's position? We've talked about this often on these international geopolitical events. The idea of America using military force, which is not ruled out, by the way, to take over Greenland, and I don't
attack a NATO ally.
Attack a NATO ally, which effectively ends NATO. Is it Section 5? One attack on one is attack on them all. I don't know how that works out. I think tomorrow is going to be the first significant marker signaling the end of NATO. Trump's not going to back down. I think he wants Greenland. He also wants Canada. Have you seen that?
Oh, sure.
And his office locally. Until Venezuela, I don't think people took him seriously. Now, oh boy, they're now thinking, yeah, this guy could take America's good to own Greenland. And I get the need for security, in the Arctic region. But I'm saying do it through NATO. You have this big base on Greenland, by the way, with about 3,000. You've taken that down to about 100. Go lease the land. Just do a deal with NATO. Put your stuff on Greenland. Do a combined strategy with the whole of NATO. You don't have to take over. But the thing is, not just military, is it? It's resources, because Greenland has got vast amounts of rare earth metals and vast amounts of energy. So it's not just the military, let's be honest here. It's about oil and gas, and it's about rare earth minerals and metals. It is. That's included, right? So I get that. I get the economic side. But why can't you do a joint integrated economic development plan with NATO countries, and kind of with the Greenlander support, develop that for all these reasons in a way that's respectful, in a way that's collaborative, and yes, develop some of the defense systems that you need to protect that part of the world. And my question is, what does the church think about all this? You've got Russia invading Ukraine, okay? And we're not happy about that. We don't like that. And the church have said it opposes that.
No, it hasn't. The church has not specifically said that. They've said they don't like war.
Right. Okay. Thank you for
on that statement, and it's as squishy as it can possibly be. Right. It does not take sides. It does not say we stand with Ukraine. It says war is so bad.
Right. Thank you for correcting me. It's a very important correction. That very important correction. So why hasn't the church taken a position on that? It's having us assume that it opposes Russia but not Ukraine. Why can't it come down on the right side of history and condemn Russia as the aggressor and support Ukraine publicly? You're right. They haven't, to correct me, they haven't said that. I thought they'd said something along those lines. Obviously, they haven't. But what's the church think about what do they support Trump taking over Greenland? What's the church think to all that's going on in the world? So we've had a conversation about the apostasy and taking guns to church in breach of the policy handbook. We've tied it to the Constitution, the right to bear arms, right to defend yourself. Someone said online here, they have a right to defend themselves. I get that. The fact that the Constitution is inspired, the founding fathers are now Mormon. There's all this stuff going on in the world. We know that the church has got a political, unofficial, informal group that advises it. Where's the leadership and direction of the church when we need it? So we're back to that again, aren't we? We seem to come back to this quite a bit.
We do. I mean, so Well, okay, just a few comments here. Colby said, I have so many feelings about the Constitution today. For Jim, as it relates to Colby and Jacob's discussion, is there a distinction between institutional authority and prophetic authority? Is that taught to membership? I don't know that the general membership sees a distinction between those two. I think I'm not even sure if I see a distinction between those two. Do you, Ian?
I was always taught that the Constitution of America is inspired of God, right? I was also taught that America, not the UK, not Europe, not Australia, sorry guys, down under, but only America was the chosen country of God, okay? And in a particular region in America as well.
Yeah, Zion will be built upon this, the American continent.
Absolutely, that's it, right? So, and then you've got this very interesting experience between Wilford Woodruff and the Founding Fathers, where they've been baptized. I mean, this is serious stuff. You know,
well,
the church, they've received the ordinances, they've accepted the gospel.
There is some historical evidence that is sort of an ex post facto retcon of what really happened. But the time that Wilford Woodruff announced this vision, many of those founding fathers were already on the records having their proxy work done for them. So there's a bit of a controversy surrounding a lot of that. But regardless, I mean, we keep coming back to this idea: where does the church stand? And everybody sort of takes their guess as to where the church stands. And because the church doesn't correct anybody, you're able to have people that believe completely diametrically opposed things on very significant issues, and the church doesn't correct them on it. As we've talked about on this podcast multiple times, the fact that the church has not, for instance, apologized for the priesthood ban means that there are still many people that believe that Cain, the curse of Cain, is still active and is still. I mean, the fact that the church is, I think, I mean, we've talked about its fear. There's also an issue with an international church. You know, the church at one point was recognized in Russia. I don't know that we are anymore. But I think there's this sense of, we can't take sides in geopolitical issues because we want to have the church in every single one of those countries. But that sort of falls apart when there is evil and there is genocide and the church is just too squeamish to say anything about it.
As I'm listening to this, now we've got some comments there, I'm visualizing something, and I'll try and paint it with my hands in the air here. I see the church and the church membership in not binary. I think there's different groups, different factions in the church, but there's at least two major groups in the church. At least two. There's more, but at least two. The big circle is the majority of right-wing Republican Orthodox members within that circle. Okay, imagine a graph, and you've got these circles, right? I'm quite a visual person. You've got a majority of very strong right-wing thinking traditional Orthodox members that have a position on all kinds of stuff, right? Some of the stuff, some of the items, some of the issues, the churches, they're aligned with the church. There are other items where they are not aligned with the church, but because they're in that circle and they're in a very powerful group that the church is, nervous about, let's use that word, right? They're allowed to say what they want to say within that circle because it's allowed. When you belong to this other circle, which is again is a sizable circle, certainly noticeable on the graph, but not as big as this guy over here, where you've got a minority where they oppose the church on certain things, where this group can get away with it, this group can't get away with it because they're not the majority. It's a simple, I see it as simple. There's complexities, but in terms of trying to understand it, that's how I see it. You've got other little factions and groups there, different group sets, but you've got the majority of this, very hard, often right wing, and includes the within that circle. You've got the Trump group there in their own, in the MAGA group within that circle, and the church is not going to rock that boat. But if you're in another circle where you oppose the church, then the church will take issue with that because you're not in this big guy over here. That makes sense?
It does. More comments. Colby says Washington and I share a birthday. Teddy Roosevelt is still my favorite president. Jim and Ian, who is yours? Who's your favorite president, Ian? Do you have one?
Abraham.
I would say Lincoln as well. I think that we're living in Lincoln's America. That when the American experiment was on the verge of collapse, it was the Gettysburg Address and Lincoln that sort of brought us back to first principles and taught us how those first principles are to be defined. And passing the 14th Amendment and passing, abolishing slavery, he was the one who actually began the process of fulfilling the dream of all men are created equal.
I have a question for you, Jim, and a question for our listeners. Do you think the Constitution of the United States of America, inspired, right, needs to be revised and updated, including but not limited to, and this is going to create some controversy maybe, allowing a president of the United States to run for a third term? Because in the UK, for example, we're going to have the same constitution. You are allowed to run for 3 or as many terms as you like. I think 3 or 4 terms. Tony Blair ran 3 times. Margaret Thatcher ran 3 times and won.
Well, so to the broader question, it's really fascinating because in 2010, I was managing my father's failed final political campaign for the United States Senate. He was defeated by Mike Lee, who fancied himself the bona fide king expert on the Constitution. Mike Lee's father is a man named Rex Lee, who was the Solicitor General for the United States under President Reagan, and he was also the president of BYU. Many people thought he was going to end up being a general authority, and he gave a talk called The Constitution and the Restoration at BYU, and it reads like a pamphlet saying, under no circumstances should you vote for my son Mike. Because Mike Lee is saying the Constitution is on par with Scripture. It's inspired, and so it's on par with Scripture. And Rex Lee in that talk said, if that's the case, then you're saying that Scripture says that Black people are 3/5 of a person, and that all of the problems with the Constitution that have been fixed with amendments, those were all inspired, whereas all the amendments are not, which really is Mike Lee's position. Mike Lee kept calling for the repeal of the 17th Amendment, which was the direct election of senators and a bunch of other nonsense things. But this whole idea that the Constitution is inspired goes back to this idea that was raised in the comments earlier about institutional authority and prophetic authority. Because when you start talking about inspired, you start talking about, okay, well, if it's inspired, then it has to be inerrant. It has to be perfect. If it's coming from God, there can't be an error in it. And that is never the experience here in mortality. We never have a time where something is free from error. We are told even that the Book of Mormon has mistakes in it. We're told, this is so. You keep coming back to why doesn't the church speak out on these issues? And I keep coming back to when are we going to confront the reality of fallibility within church leaders? And the whole constitutional issue does this. I know people get mad if I start talking politics, but looking at what Trump is doing right now, it's got even Republicans jumping up and down and threatening impeachment. Mitch McConnell has threatened impeachment. There have been several others. I don't think it's going to get that far because I just don't see Republicans having enough of a spine to stand up to this guy. But if he were to invade Greenland and dismantle NATO, which is the greatest alliance in the history of the world and has kept the peace and kept us safe for the better part of a century, it's just, and to do so, why? I mean, here's the thing. I don't think it has anything to do with defense. I don't think it has anything to do with rare earth. I think it is this simple. You look at a map, and Greenland is huge on a map. It's not really that huge in real life because that map is flattening things out. But Donald Trump is so stupid that he thinks, for instance, that political asylum and insane asylums are the same thing. He keeps talking about we got to get rid of asylum because all these countries have opened their insane asylums and dumped all their insane people on the United States. And it became clear, wait a minute, he doesn't know that asylum has multiple definitions. And looking at Greenland, he has a picture of James J. Polk, K. Polk, former president who was the last president in the history of the United States. He has that picture hanging in the Oval Office of the last president of the United States who expanded United States territory. And he has said over and over again that that's important to him because that's leaving his legacy. Because if he expands the United States, everybody goes, look how much bigger the United States is because of Trump. He's building a great, big, huge ballroom next to the White House. The ballroom is bigger than the White House. Why? Because he can, and because it shows everybody, look what a big dick I have. I mean, am I in trouble for saying dick?
No, I think you're right. You're right. You're finished. Go ahead.
No, so with Greenland, it's this simple. It really is this simple. Greenland is big. I get Greenland. I'm big. I'm a big deal. And that's it. That's it. There is no, you can't sit there and talk him down and say, look, everything you want from Greenland is already available under current treaties. We already have a treaty that allows us to have as much military on Greenland as we want.
That is true.
Yet he doesn't care. None of that is convincing. And that's why he keeps talking about Canada. Geez, wouldn't that map look cool if it was all the United States and everybody for generations to come would say, Donald Trump did that. He made that big thing. That's how dumb he is. That's how concrete he is. That's how stupid he is. And ultimately, that's how evil he is. And the fact that we don't ever have the church confront that is just absolutely maddening.
It's extraordinary. As I listen to you, I worry that you're right, because here I am, like most people, thinking this thing with Greenland is a defense, energy, infrastructure, etc. deal. Then if you strip it away further, in my mind, I see it as a big real estate deal, right? I'm trying to think of the Trump thinking now. There's a big real estate. If you strip it away even further, which I think you're right, especially in light of Trump's reaction and response to Norway, accusing Norway of controlling the Nobel Peace Prize selection process, by the way,
nonsense,
and not happy with Norway because they haven't recognized that he saved, quote, tens of millions of lives, and therefore is deserving the Nobel Peace Prize. When I think of that, I think it ties me to what you've just said, because I think about an individual who thinks like that and speaks that and actually writes that online to Norway, like a petulant child, not happy that they didn't get some kind of recognition and reward in the classroom for doing these great things, and how worthy is it of getting the Nobel Peace Prize. It's about, if you strip it away to your point, it's about him wanting to be a huge section in history, right? To have such an impact on the planet that we're talking about Trump in the history books for centuries to come. It's about egotistical, if I pronounce that correctly. Okay. Yeah. It's about self-serving. It's about personal legacy. And it's about ego. It's about ego the size of a small moon. If you are right, if that's what we're talking about, heaven help us. And when we talk about heaven helping us, I am behind that. I'm hoping that the church, the prophet, President Oaks, who I think is a good man, who wants to do the right thing. I wonder, as he knelt down on his knees himself, and as a presidency, like you do in a state presidency or a bishopric, I hope this has happened. If not, I'd be shocked if it hasn't. And ask God directly, as his prophet, what as a prophet, can and should he do in respect to these serious geopolitical events that are taking place? What does God think to all of this? Because today, on the press newsroom there, Trump was asked. I'll try to get this close. What does God think of Trump's performance over the last 12 months since he was installed as the 147th president of the United States? And would God be pleased? That was the question that one of the journalists asked. I'm pretty close to quoting them. And Trump said today he felt God would be pleased with what he's doing and how he's doing it, right? So Trump believes God is endorsing all of his, or most or all of his actions and behaviors, and is happy with his performance. I would like to know what a living prophet thinks, what God thinks about that, right? And I just think the church needs to have the balls, frankly, to stand up and to speak up and to have a position on what the heck is going on out there. This is a heavy conversation, isn't it?
It is indeed. You've got a topic that I want to shift gears to.
I do. And it's probably any comments before we break to this other topic?
Let's just dig through these comments here. Modern politics. You want to read some of these? So I'm not reading all.
Yep. I'm trying to see that. Okay. Could you hang on? Give me a second.
It's on your screen.
I can't see it. Could you read that? I can't.
It says modern U.S. politics are an IQ test. Americans are failing the test. That's from Guy McDude. Colby says, because the ego of a man who doesn't understand what led us into NATO and how it is primarily responsible for almost a century of peace and prosperity, we're in trouble. Amen, Colby. It's also prime compute power for AI server farms. We talked about that a little bit. It'll come down to food security eventually. Those countries that can't keep a lid on their populations will be a problem for everyone else. And Guy McDude says, Peter Higgs, I was indoctrinated to have a bushel of children. They are hungry, always. And then Clayton Settles showed up. I'm here, totally forgot. Clayton, shame, says Guy McDude. Clayton says, in the same vein, would you change the content of the missionary lessons? If so, how? Well, do you want to talk about missionary stuff here?
I do. It's a good segue, Clayton.
Thank you, Clayton.
Yeah, so guys, you've been very patient with our pretty intense religious political conversation, but it's hard to escape what's going on in the world, isn't it, really? Anyway, I don't know about you. I feel better venting it, at least. So, talk about the problems of the world. On to something interesting, fun, perhaps lighthearted as well. Jim, when you were serving your mission, what was the instruction direction? What was the code for not flirting with sister missionaries or developing personal relationships with females in general, but certainly sister missionaries? What was the instruction?
The instruction was not. Do not do such a thing ever under any circumstances. Do not ever put yourself in a circumstance where you are alone with someone of the opposite sex, and lock your heart do you remember the Spencer Kimball talk? Lock your heart.
I do. And go ahead. Sorry. Go ahead. Continue.
No, that's it. That's
and you focus on the work, be strictly obedient through the day, right? Get up on time, do all the work, get out on time, boom, 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 very structured, very regimental. And you and I followed the rules, right? Strictly. We were good missionaries. We were obedient, right? Very obedient. I would argue too much, but anyway, whatever. And the position, the instruction was to avoid anything that would generate any attraction to to sister missionaries or to anyone, right? But certainly, sister missionaries, or to even think about, flirting or developing with the opposite sex. And so your cousin, I think, who is Peggy Stack, wrote an interesting article in the Salt Lake Tribune. I want to quote some of that because she made did this article in the Tribune and talks about the idea of lowering the minimum missionary age for young women from 19 to 18 was meant to reduce the age of marriage, according to some people in the church, for couples in the church. I've just got that says. So said, she was quoting actually President Oakes in an interview he and his wife, Kristen, gave recently. I think it's with the church-owned Deseret News. And he said this in that interview, and I think Peggy Stack is quoting that interview. Elder Oak says this: in the time that we have lowered the age for young men and for young women in the past, we've seen an increase in people who meet someone in the mission field and marry them. Oakes went on to say, which is perfectly appropriate if it doesn't start too early in their missionary service. He said this is part of the Lord's plan to overcome the tendency of waiting until the late 20s to have a first marriage. Oakes also said, I think we will see a reduction in the age of marriages. Now, I have an interpretation of that, but I want to get your interpretation of that first.
Well, what's he saying there?
What do you think is?
Well, one of the things I think he's doing is that recognizing all of the turmoil in the world, and Oakes, being a constitutional scholar and a very bright man, certainly has very strong opinions. And I think recognizing that he's not receiving the kind of revelation that I think a lot of people would expect him to receive. That a lot of people think, okay, well, the prophet is always talking to Jesus, and certainly they bring up this kind of stuff. And so he's thinking, oh, geez, I'm not getting any of this, but what is it that I am getting? And I think he thinks, okay, the thing that's going to solve all the world's problems is if we have more babies. I mean that was essentially his first message in General Conference after President Nelson died. He wasn't yet president of the church, but he essentially was functioning as president of the church. And he talked about it in those kinds of ways. He's like, we don't have all the answers to all of the world's problems, but we do know that the proclamation on the family and having children, that's essential. And so he's really sort of leaning into that as much as he can, thinking that if he does this, that he is going to have some kind of impact on the age of people marry. It's really interesting. He talks about a first marriage. I'm still on my first marriage. You're still on your first marriage. I don't have any intention of having a second marriage, barring some kind of terrible tragedy. But, it's just really interesting that he's now focused on this. And this is what will solve the world's problems, is if Latter-day Saints just have more children, that will stem the tide of shrinkage in the church, because we'll have more children of record because we have fewer children of record. And I think it's really deeply naive to think that that is even possible, because the reason people are having fewer children has nothing to do, I think, with wickedness, or any of that. I think people love children as much as they always have, but the economic reality in which we find ourselves demands that people, if you're going to have two children, both parents are going to have to work, and they're going to have to work essentially if you're going to have, I didn't say two children, I did say two children, but I meant if you're going to have a lot of children, you've got to have a lot of money. Housing is ridiculously expensive compared to what it was when Dallin H. Oakes was raising children. And incomes have not kept up with inflation. And it's just the economic reality is such that the idea of a 1950s breadwinner coming home to a stay-at-home wife and their 6 children, it just doesn't work anymore. And so, but I think that's what this is. What do you think this is?
I think you've nailed most of the same points I was going to say. I think that if you look at, Oakes is a very intelligent man, right? He set us apart. He did some training with us. I spent some time with him through the day, had some personal conversation with him. Very smart individual, and seems to have a pretty good grasp of where he would like to take the church. And I think, again, when you do this forecasting, these professionals that come in and do this predictive modeling and forecasting of the church, and we know that happens, right? What's the church look like in 10 years now, 15 years now? What's the different trajectories that the church can go? We know that the church is hemorrhaging young people. We know that. We know many young people are leaving religion, period, not just the church, right? We know that the church is hemorrhaging other groups, that the rate of growth, at the best rate of growth has declined, has reduced. We know that. There's limited growth in places like Africa, but elsewhere, the church is struggling. We know that. So the church, rightly, intelligently is thinking, where do we get that growth? We talked about measuring growth through temple, number of temples being built. Well, that is an indicator for sure. Tells the world that the church is still growing. Measuring audiences in the temple and, sacred audience in the temple. We talked about that. We've been one of the first podcasts, if not the first one, to predict that the church will start to measure and report on temple activity. But to offset the tide of loss with young people and people in general in the church, what better way to kind of compensate for that, to offset that, by encouraging people to have more children? And what better way to do that to counter the concerns that people have about marrying later because they're financially stronger, in the 30s. So, put my career first, get myself on a financial footing before I can even start to think about having a family and having kids, which are very expensive. So by saying it's okay to start those conversations on a mission, which is an absolute no-no when I was in Scotland, the same for you, right? You don't even go there, right? But by saying that some of these relationships begin in the mission field earlier, he's changing the doctrine. He's changing is it doctrine? But he's changing the mission policy compared to when I was serving a mission, by saying it's okay to have those conversations. It's okay to have a relationship with a missionary, sister missionary, after your mission. Certainly you don't date on the mission, but if it starts there and it turns into a date after you get home earlier, what is he doing? Is reducing that timeline by what, 8 years, 9 years, 5 years, right? So starting off, if you've got a bit of a relationship with somebody on the mission and you kind of want to get together after the mission, which is okay, and then you start off pretty quickly after the mission where you're spiritual high and you're encouraged to marry, chances are maybe that group will get married sooner and have more kids, and will provide some measure of relief in consideration of the losses that the church is experiencing. So I think you've nailed it. I think that's exactly what he's doing. He's being very strategic. It's a very smart move. The church is looking to areas where can it demonstrate growth, right? Well, children record growth, and also it's a financial driver, isn't it? If more and more people, if the rate of loss decreases, then the church is in a better position financially. So not trying to be too skeptical, but there's always a financial element, I think, with the church. There's a membership element, and I think it's a very strategic position to take, and I think he's done that deliberately. But so now you can actually start to have those conversations in the mission and say, hey, after the mission, sister so-and-so, do you fancy going on a date? We can't date here and now, but, the first Saturday after the mission, let's get together. Let's take them to the DV8 nightclub in Salt Lake or something.
Okay, what if I told you that my father proposed to a sister missionary on his mission in Scotland, and she accepted?
Oh, wow. This is breaking news right now.
It is true.
Okay.
He was her, essentially, what we now call a zone leader, and wrote her a letter when he was transferred and handed it to her before he left the transfer, and it was a proposal of marriage. And she accepted by letter, and she went back to Utah, and then my dad came home, and then they broke up. So my mother is not that woman. My father was engaged 4 times.
Oh, right. Wow.
And got married at the age of 29, almost 30. Back then he was an old maid, if you can be such a thing. So I mean, this is not new. I don't know. It's just bizarre to me that anybody would think that there's a panacea that can fix this.
Mm.
So, all right. So comments quickly.
Clayton, there is.
Clayton says, sorry, Guy McDude, I was practicing piano and got carried away. Guy McDude says, and oil, I think he's talking about why Trump wants things. And Clayton says the answer is no, but I don't remember what the question is. Guy McDude says it used to. I think Eisenhower ran 3 times, right? No, he did not. The only president that ran multiple times was Franklin Delano Roosevelt, and he's the reason we have, is it the 26th Amendment? We have the amendment to the Constitution that forbids 3 terms. Franklin Roosevelt ran for 4 terms, died very early into his 4th term. I'd kept his health problems a secret from the country at large, and the country didn't even know that he was paralyzed, that he was in a wheelchair. And so that amendment was to do that. So Eisenhower was forbidden from doing that. But most presidents, I don't think any presidents ran for a 3rd term prior to Roosevelt, because George Washington set the template. George Washington ran for 2 terms and was wildly popular and could have been king. And one of the greatest things that Washington ever did was step away from power voluntarily and set the example. 2nd term for a president is usually bad. We don't want one person getting too much power. Amen, Clayton. Okay. Ian, for a 3rd term, we wouldn't need to scrap the entire Constitution. It's the 22nd Amendment. Okay, it's the 22nd Amendment that did that. Okay. Franklin D. Roosevelt broke the tradition, elected 4 times. Yes. Like I said, modern politics and IQ test at the very top. Guy McDude. Not what a big dick I have, what a big dick I am, says Jay.
Yes.
Yes.
That's true.
Hey, Jim, a few weeks ago in your discussion on the Word of Wisdom, you mentioned that Heber J. Grant drank a glass of beer every night till his death. Can you confirm this? I cannot confirm that, because actually I went back and started talking to people. And so apparently I got things mixed up. He was prescribed by his doctor to drink a beer as a young man in order to gain weight. And apparently developed a big taste for it, really enjoyed it. And he actually, I think, ended up even as an apostle, because when he was an apostle, he was still working in the insurance business, and he would insure all the saloons downtown, and he was a big beer drinker and felt terrible about it. And so I think that's one of the reasons why he implemented the Word of Wisdom. Now, I still have this recollection of my father telling me that, but maybe he was wrong, or maybe I'm remembering it wrong, but I cannot confirm that is actually true. It was Thomas Jefferson who believed that a new constitution should be adopted roughly every 19 years. Not that I wholly agree. I don't know that I wholly agree either, Howie Rourke. J. Haddon, I can only find vague references on the web that indicate it was in his youth and he stopped. Yes, that's what I have found since. Clayton said, I want to hear from Ian why he thinks Bednar is a lightweight. Did you say Bednar is a lightweight?
I did. I don't know. I just don't seem. Is that Clayton that asked that?
Clayton.
He's done some odd, strange things. It just gives me the EBGBs a bit. I just don't know. He just seems very flimsy, and I think he's going to be around for a while, isn't he? He's one of the younger apostles.
He was called at the age of 52.
So eventually he's probably going to have a long run as a prophet. Is Bednar. So I can't be too. I got to be careful. I might meet him one day. Who knows? But it just seems a little bit tone, his spirit. It just seems to be just doesn't sit right with me. You know, some apostles you connect with, others you don't. Like Nelson, I was just uncomfortable with Nelson. Oakes, I'm more comfortable with. I know he's unpopular with many, but I met him and worked with him, and he did some training, and we had some private personal conversations. He interviewed me personally, just me and him in the room, and Elder Cook, the younger one, not the apostle. Is it David Cook? And we just got along, and it just seemed to click. I just don't know. I just don't get the good feel, the good spirit from Bednar. I don't know why.
But that's different from saying he's a lightweight.
Well, what I mean by lightweight, I just, what's he done? What's he did? What's he said? What's he done? He just seems to be he seems like a filler of an apostle. So he covers general topics. He's not the guy to go to come out and announce something bold, is he? I just don't see him as a alpha leader. It just isn't. It's not a driver personality. There's 4 different personalities: amiable, analytical, driver, and expressive. There's 4 different groups. I don't see him as a driver like Oakes. I see him as more of a amiable, somebody who wants to help, bit of a filler. That's what I mean by lightweight.
Well, J.A. Haddon calls him Susan's husband, and that's kind of his nickname in most sort of ex-Mormon circles. And I don't really understand that reference. I mean, his wife is named Susan, but there's something supposedly, I think, there's some story there that I don't quite get. Let's see. Jay Haddon says, after we finish this discussion of our fearless orange leader, I think we've moved on from that. Guy McDude, New Year's resolution, minimize political discussion, consumption. My blood pressure and cholesterol levels can't take it, hence the recumbent. Don't get me wrong, I'll march when the time is right. Don't blame you, Guy McDude. Jay Haddon says, agreed, Q15 needs to grow a pair and stand up to fascism. And he also references lock your heart. Clayton Settle says, oh, wow, we had a counselor in the mission presidency that was totally rogue. And one time he told the elders to take the sister missionaries out to lunch before we went home. Wow. At one point, he said,
Bruce.
And Bruce says, on my mission, oh, can you see these now? You want to read these?
Just came up, yeah. On my mission, one elder and sister missionary were making out in a room at church on Sunday. It was made AP soon after.
No, is that true? I don't know that that's true.
Is it really? That's fascinating, yeah. Thank you, Bruce. As missionaries, Gamma Dude says, we called the hot investigator snakes.
So did we.
Partake of the fruits. I have some regrets.
Didn't you call them snakes?
I think so.
I think that was a thing.
I think so.
I remember Elder Keddington, Elder and Sister Keddington. Did you?
Yes, I remember. He's a piano player. Is it brother of Elder?
Elder Keddington was a singer.
That's right. Oh, yes.
Sister Keddington was his second wife. His first wife had died, and Sister Keddington is still alive. He's not. Right. I saw Sister Keddington at Elder Ballard's funeral because she's Elder Ballard's sister.
They were piano player, weren't they?
No, he was a singer. He was like he would. I mean, I don't think he was I don't know, but they had a daughter.
It was a piano player
that was a snake. That we'd go there, and there was this girl that was the same age as all of us, and it was like, ooh, we need to stay away from her. Remember that term from that.
I have some stories of some of the sister missionaries that I can't share here. Oh, boy.
All right. You had to find yourself a wife on the mission. We all thought he was crazy, but maybe he was more inspired than I thought. You want to read these? Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I hear met his forbidden fruit in the field, or so I hear.
Colby.
Caesar
his wife on his mission. Colby sees around corners.
Demographic transition equals higher education, lower child mortality means fewer children.
Correct.
Yeah. One of the 100 and unseen weights on my shelf was the broken promises related to childbearing and prosperity. I checked the boxes, and I'm still digging myself out of the lifelong financial hole. Yeah. By the way, Jim, I heard over the weekend from a reliable source, quite high up, that the church is considering a policy of supporting young families financially to help them with children. So just imagine, right now there's in the tax system in Canada and the UK, probably the same in America. If you have children, you go into a tax bracket, as you know, right? When you're married and you have you have children, there's a tax structure and bracket that you fall into. It's certainly the case in the UK. I used to be. Might change it now. I'm hearing that the church might do something to help young families financially who want to have children, because it's so expensive, and you have to have two people now, the mom and the dad, go out and work full time, and even that can be very difficult. So the financial driver around having kids is probably the biggest factor, or one of the biggest factors for sure. If the church can help families in some way through the welfare program and take some of the pressure off, keeping in mind the church has got vast resources, that would be a smart move, because governments are actually taking away those tax incentives, certainly in the UK, where it's becoming even more expensive now to have kids in the UK. It's just impossible. Financially, it's just virtually undoable, right?
Yeah, it's true.
All right, we're almost now and a quarter in. We're probably almost done, but
yeah, let's just, if we dive through these comments and then we'll be done.
Go ahead.
Yeah, this is J.A. Haddon. Thanks for clarifying. It's a better story is till his death, but thanks for being clear. That's the Heber J. Grant story. Part of me believes the till his death thing, but I can't back it up. Bruce Butcher, my grandpa drove Heber J. Grant in a taxi several times. Grandpa wasn't a member. He referred to him as Heber Jesus. All right. Yeah, and this is the Susan's husband. He seems to have a high opinion of himself. Wowza, I'm late. Yes, you are, apostate of mind, but better late than never. I promise that the story is true, Bruce says, about the AP making out with Sister Missionary. He was zone leader at the time. How many Sister Missionaries did you make out with, Ian? It was like 12, right?
Well, my answer to that is that I was never an AP.
Oh, so there you go. If you'd only made out with some of those sisters,
I could have made it to the top.
There was a sign-in event that referred to Susan as Sister David A. Bednar. From there, it became a meme. Oh, okay, that's funny. Yeah, my mother refers to herself sometimes. She says, I spent my entire life as an LWO. Do you know what an LWO is?
No, I do not.
Lovely wife of. Here's Joyce Bennett, lovely wife of Senator Robert F. Bennett. And I mean, she said it with kind of a smile on her face, but you could tell she was not happy about how dismissive it is. And so, elder sister David A. Bednar, geez. Okay, lower tithing to 1 to 5%. Maybe we'll have more kids. Up to you, Oaks.
Smart move. No, Clayton, that's a smart move, but the church won't do that. It needs the money, right? Give the church 10%, right? Full tithe payers, a young family, want to have kids. Church will help you through the welfare program. That makes sense.
You want to read these, or can you see that?
Yeah, there were so many mysteries on our mission, says Apostate of Mind, who went back to get a wife. When active, I judged them fairly harsh for doing so. I think I was like you, Apostate of Mind. Now, though, I'm glad they were bold enough to go for what they want. Yeah, I thought that. Actually, I kind of was harsh in my judgment. You went back and you started dating some of the sister missions. I'm thinking, what were you thinking while you're serving a mission with that, when you're around that sister? Because I was quite strict, straight up and down. Now I think smart move on their part. Yeah.
I dated a sister missionary for a minute. It didn't really go anywhere. I think we dated 2 or 3 times, and we didn't quite click. She was a lovely person. Or just stop asking for 10% when you don't need it. Yep. So
good point.
All right. Well, we have reached the end of our comments, so we should probably end this before the flood of comments comes in.
We do, and we have, as I close this, Jim, we do have one more thing that I want to share, if I may. So it is next week, next Tuesday. I, along with you, Jim, are very excited to announce that we're going to have a live Inside Out program featuring Ganesh Cherian, who is a independent researcher, former bishop, and author, someone who has written this brilliant book titled Joseph Smith, the Architect of Mormonism, a Topical Biography. Ganesh, who's been on the podcast once and also twice, actually, with Greg Prince. We had a wonderful conversation with Greg and Ganesh, and we met with Ganesh earlier. So Ganesh will be with us next Tuesday, 7 p.m. Mountain Time. Jim, I'm so excited. There's an opportunity for our listeners to ask questions about Joseph Smith. Ganesh has got a very unique and distinct insight into Joseph Smith's life and coming it from a topographical position. So we hope many of our listeners, or all listeners, will join us next week when we have that live conversation with Ganesh. Jim, I always enjoy these conversations with you. We said just before we started the podcast tonight, we said there's no shortage of material, is there?
There's never a shortage of material.
There's an abundance of material with the church, of course. And so I thank you for being part of this wonderful conversation. I also want to take this opportunity to thank all of our listeners for being with us this evening. I hope you enjoyed it as much as we enjoyed you. And we look forward to being with you again next week. We want to make this a fixture, Jim, every Tuesday night, 7 p.m. Mountain Time. And we are committed to doing that. So on behalf of Jim and I, and again, all of our listeners here and beyond, people who are here and not here, thank you to all of you for listening, and hope you enjoyed this week's show. Jim, thank you again, as always.
Thank you. Thanks, everybody.